Hello, everyone. Today I have a good friend of mine, Damien, with me, and we are going to talk all things project management and processes and why having a project manager is so important when you are leading whether it's a new software or even just building out the right processes, being able to have somebody help manage your team and get the right outcome. So thanks so much, Damien, for joining me today.
No worries at all. Thanks for having me, Christy.
Yeah. So if you want to share, we've worked on projects before and just kind of sharing about why you see how the importance of having a really solid project manager is with kind of showing how the project's going to be successful or not.
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, to caveat that before I dive into a little bit more, I mean, ideally, in a perfect world, we shouldn't really need project managers. I would like to throw as a little bit of a side comment because people should be able to be trusted to get on with something that we all agree on and actually decide this is what we want to do with the business or the organization or the software implementation, etc., that we want to deliver. And ideally, we should be able to say, okay, guys, this is what we want to do. Go ahead and get it done, and then come back to me in X amount of time, and it should be complete. But unfortunately, it's not always the way it goes down when it comes to these types of things, and you do need someone to, I guess, keep things a little bit more aligned and make sure that people are driving through on the things that we need for these types of projects. So, I see the importance of project management in a lot of processes, and in my career is mainly trying to get alignment between a lot of different stakeholders, not just from the from the sponsor level and the executive level, but all the way down to the people on the floor or the end users who are going to be using that. And that's a process in itself, as you've kind of highlighted there, Christy. But it's also just getting human engagement when it comes to these things. So making sure that you're getting the buy-in from people, not just the higher level who are trying to make the profit, but the people who are going to be end using the system at the end of it is the key crutch that I think leads to successful results. I like to always say that how you start a project is how you're going to end it. And I think a lot of people like to rush into the initial phases of a project. It's exciting, especially for the higher ups. They want to see the profit coming back straight away from whatever type of initiative that they have that they want to put forward. But spending that extra time to get your team engaged, your stakeholders aligned, your sponsors aligned, it leads to a lot better result down the line. So I think taking that extra time at the start of a project always leads to better results at the back end of it, and that's also leading to the things you talk about, which is process and really making sure that what the teams are able to achieve is easy to follow and easy to execute.
Yeah, and I think going back to your point, the stakeholders and anybody that's higher up, they want to see the results so much faster than usually the project is willing to give them at that moment in time. And there's so many little details that go in that the people that aren't in the day-to-day don't see that. And to them, it is, well, I don't understand why we don't have this all done today. And it's, well, we're waiting on your team to do this, or there's a lot more complex issues that we're finding that we need to put into this.
Exactly. I mean, there's a lot of different agendas usually going on under the surface, I've noticed too, especially at that higher level. Everyone has some type of reason why they wanted the project to push through, whether it be an executive wants to get some type of, promotional bump, or they're trying to fight for some other aspect within their teams, or, their career aspirations. You don't always get the full truth when it comes to what you want to see in alignment between projects. And I've had stakeholders and sponsors who jump into meetings where they sort of say, yep, no problem. And then we've had ones, Christy and I have dealt with clients who've been very, as you'd say, micromanaging and shifting their priorities on the week to week, month to month basis. Even if we do have defined scope and solidified plans of what we're trying to deliver and what our success metrics are, it's really challenging and can be quite frustrating in that role to sort of say, okay, how do you sort of, like Mick is actually pointing to now, how do you balance that flexibility of structure, and I think project managers get a lot of flack when it comes to padding things out or, leaving breathing space for deliverable execution. But I think it is warranted because we can only work as fast as the slowest person in the group. So, you really can't. You can always aim for, fast success that's going to lead to quick profitability. But at the end of the day, humans are always involved in this process. And my background is in engineering before I went into project management. The easiest way to make a process more efficient is to get rid of the human component. But when it comes to this type of work, we like to work with the humans, and they're the people who are ultimately using it. So, change management obviously is another part that we're probably not going to touch on today, but it is something that is very important to get people bought into that process to drive the success at the back end. But those conflicting priorities.
Yeah. And I think to Kyler's point, I like her question. True or false? Phase 2 is where initiatives go to die, and I think we've seen that a lot of times happen. If it's not project managed well for the phase 2, or even come out well in the first initiative, then a lot of times it just gets buried and it doesn't resurface very well. I guess you can speak to that probably more than I can, of how you've kind of seen those phase 2 initiatives, either, they go to the graveyard, or they're trying to be carried through in sometimes a different way than what the initial phase was.
Yeah. And I think when it comes to that sort of phase 2 piece in all phases of projects, like, I think every corporation or every client I've worked with has some different definition of project management. Because when you look at PMBOK or PMI and all the the accredited organizations, when it comes to project management, agile, hybrid, waterfall, whatever methodology you want to use, everyone picks and chooses the bits they want to actually implement into their organization. And then, don't get me wrong, I don't think you need to go the full gamut a lot of the time, but everyone's got a different interpretation of what they want to see out of that project. And usually cutting the corners involves trying to increase the speed, but then it leads to non-defined success objectives at the back end of the project. So I mean, for right now, it also depends on the project, whether you're jumping into the project midstream as the project manager because someone else has made a bit of a mess of it, or you're starting from scratch, but they want to, I've walked into projects where we're moving into phase 2 1 week after I get there, or less than 1 week after I get there, maybe a day after I get there, so there's no initiation at all. It's just here, there's your charter, go and do it. It's okay. I don't know any of the stakeholders. I don't know where they're at in the engagement cycle. I don't know what my scope is properly. You've just said, generalize scope dot points. There's 3 dot points on a slide. That's there's your scope. It's okay. So how do I know if I'm doing this properly or not when we get to the back end of this project? And we want it done in 6 weeks. It's well, okay, where'd you come up with that number? Oh, that's all the time we have. It's okay, guys, this is not going to be successful.
Yeah, not so much.
Don't.
And I think I've even seen too is projects we worked on together, is you can have certain teams within an organization that are very organized. Those departments, they're very clear on what they need. And you have teams I mean, I've had experience with ones where, there's internal kind of button heads because they're not aligned internally in that department of what the outcome needs to be. And there's fights for the prestige and some of the pride that gets in the way instead of listening. And I think that always throws some interesting twists when you're trying to project manage, but then also give a deliverable. So specifically around ones where you have to help produce processes for a department, and giving what all of those details are. And when people aren't aligned, it's crazy, and you can't really do your job well to be able to lead them.
Exactly. And I think you kind of touched on that in the terms of, this is back to my point around different priorities, right? And I think in your example and ones I've dealt with in the past too, usually the people who are hardest to get on the journey of something new is someone who's been in the organization for a long time. There's very much that the way we've done things kind of mentality. And I think it goes deeper in the way I try to address it when it comes to, I think I was looking back through here with mixed questions around, what does a successful, behaviors of a successful team look like? I think it's really removing that fear of I'm going to lose my job if this thing comes in, or I'm going to be underwater with what the new initiative is, especially when it comes to software. My background is originally in manufacturing, and that's where I started my project management journey. I was dealing with people who were putting boxes on a line for a career. That's what they did. I don't want to bash on any generational dynamics, but there is a difference between the acceptance of continuous improvement between the older generations to the younger generations. And I think that it's that fear of, either A, learning something new and not being able to learn it, and B, this is going to take my job and my livelihood for my family, etc. Which I guess, for ourselves, Christy, like, we're very much people who are willing to learn and adapt, and we have to keep evolving, I guess, as people and in our careers to continue to be successful. But I think it's instilling that knowledge with those people that this isn't the end of the road for you when it comes to this type of career. It's something you need to understand that, it's an opportunity to grow a little bit. People learn new skills all the time. And I think, not trying to be too nostalgic or whatever, but I think people who live into longer age are the ones who are engaging their mental faculties as much as possible as they grow older. Like those who sit on the couch and watch TV and do nothing, like, they're probably going to waste away a little bit faster than someone who's like still, doing complex problem solving and using their brain to continue as they move forward in their career. So I think in the situation you're talking about, and I know I think we had different dynamics in that sense, that we had people who were very set in like, I'm willing to like learn something new to get a little bit further in my career.
Yeah. And I think to Kyler's question here, how do you secure that alignment with those organizations? Yeah.
Trust. So for me, it's creating an environment where you're not seen as the authoritative or know-all figure, but it's not servant leadership either. I think a lot of people try to use this like servant leadership, like, what can I do for you? And like, kind of bend over backwards for people. I like to try to create an environment where, like, hey, I'll ask the stupid question, or the quote unquote stupid question. I like to try and create that environment straight away where it's like, I don't know what I'm talking about with this. I rely on you to provide me like information that is going to be helpful to us being successful, and then allow people that chance to sort of like ask those questions as well. And don't get me wrong, that doesn't always work. But another thing I try to do when it comes to the start of my project and getting to know my stakeholders is meet each of them individually and actually try to build a little bit of rapport, some type of common ground, some chance to actually like hear their 2 cents about how they feel either about other people in the project team, because there's usually dynamics when it comes to like, oh, I don't like working with this person, or we have past history, or blah, blah, blah. Or they don't feel comfortable speaking up in meetings because they don't want to sound stupid, or they don't want to, share their ideas and be shouted down or talked over. So building that trust through those type of avenues leads me to usually better alignment. And then like, I've noticed over the years, like I don't end up with, stakeholders that I still don't keep in contact with generally, because we've built some type of rapport. And it also helps you as a PM or a lead on a project to identify who are the go-to people, who are the people I can potentially rely on to help pick up some slack when I'm struggling with things, or people I need to go to for certain information. Like, just treating everyone the same. You need to do that in the open forum, but you need to know who are the people who are going to help you be successful in the project. And I think being able to identify them and rely on them to help you drive things forward and double down on those relationships leads to a much more successful outcome.
Yeah, I would highly agree with you on that. Sometimes even though you try to build trust, like I've had that, it works, but not as well as when you have a team that really wants to try. But there is something about that it's gaining that trust, and they start to see that, oh, okay, what you're doing is, really helping us.
Well, it's not even about like getting the trust every time. I don't think you ever get the trust fully every time. Like, there's always going to be someone, but it gives you the information at least to understand, okay, that person's like hesitant with me. They're not going to give me like clear information. Maybe they're going to try to like, work some other agenda. I need to go down this avenue or talk to these people instead, or I need to escalate it up to sponsors, or, that's the point of having all the project management, governance processes in place, that if you get to a point where there's no stakeholders you can trust, it's like, okay, well, this is where I need to sort of figure out, do I have to go up the chain to get that more alignment? Do we need to redo our scope, etc.?
Yeah.
It's very valuable information.
It is. And then I like this one too by Mick. When do you push through resistance, and when do you pause and reset?
And it's a good question. I think it's a very broad question, because it really depends on what's the type of resistance and what are they resistant to. Is it something that's going to be like is it a part of the critical path? Is it a dependency? Is it just in general they just don't trust you and they're just being resistant to all your ideas or the ways you were trying to do things? I think it really depends on what the outcome is on the back end of that. So, if it's going to be something that's going to, plague the project and push it way behind, then you're likely going to have to push through. and potentially try to find another way around that person or that group of people, or as I said, escalate up through your governance pathways to get a better better support from your executives and your sponsors. Or if it says something as simple as like, I don't trust someone within the team, or I don't feel confident sharing my 2 cents on something, then I think taking a pause and spending a little bit extra time to like get that buy-in and get them on board is going to help you do a better job at the start and at the end, because slowing down at the start, as I've already pointed to, that really helps lead to a better outcome at the end. As much as it annoys sponsors and executives and the people paying the bills, it really does. Like, you don't just run a marathon by sprinting at the start. Like, you need to jog a bit and pace yourself, and then you get some momentum, and then you know what I mean. Like, I always try to talk about it as momentum when it comes to my projects. I just am really trying to get buy-in and momentum as I move forward with it, because once you get the buy-in at the start, it leads to way more momentum.
Mm-hmm. And I've seen that too on projects I've worked in over the last year. Of you'll have the project sponsor and they want everything done yesterday, and it's a project that's at least 6 to 8 months. And it's back to, hey, well, I don't know why it's taking you so long. This doesn't seem like it should. And then sometimes just not understanding the details that come in. But I've had those where it's on a weekly basis of, well, you've only accomplished this. I could have done it in my sleep. And I'm like, okay, well, more power to you if you would like to help work in those off hours of your time to help us speed up the project. But not following a plan too kind of sends things really bad. And it was explaining to them the guardrails are in place for a reason for the particular project, because if, to your point, if you start out as a marathon sprint, you're going to get tired by mile 10 or mile 2, depending on how quickly you run and how
more like half mile for me, but
there's those things that come into, and it's like, there's a process, there's a plan for a reason, and we have to follow that. And yes, there are certain places where I've even had to deviate from it and pivot or whatnot, but you always are coming back around to some type of plan. It's not, hey, let's just go and see where the wind takes us and hope we get to our end result sometime.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the point of having charters and scopes, and being strict on those scopes. Like, as a PM, as much as people, I think that was, now I'm going down another tangent, but I think a lot of people, not just project managers, are avoidant of conflict, I guess. Like, they don't want to have the conflict. They don't want to have a sponsor who is pushing back on them or challenging them, or, saying the things you're saying, when like, oh, I could have got this done overnight. It's like, well, to me, yes, it's annoying, and especially when you're trying your best and trying to stick within the scope that they've given you, and they're changing their mind, it can be frustrating. But I'd rather have an engaged sponsor and stakeholder than someone who's just like, yep, okay, yep, and then you give them what you think is successful, and they say, no, that's not what I wanted.
Yeah.
Go back and do it all again. It's like, okay, that was like 4 months down the drain, like that. So I think a lot of PMs try to keep everyone happy rather than necessarily do the job they're supposed to do, which is tell them no when, this is not something I can deliver. Like, yeah, I want to be successful. I want to have happy clients, but I think being responsible in your role is like, this is what I've been paid to do, or this is what I'm being paid to do, is like, and it's going to lead to a better outcome for you as the client, or you as the employer, and you as the organization. And it's just that confidence factor. I think, like, initially when you start out, I was guilty of it too. In those first few years, you're like, oh God, like, I need to get every project's got to be on time, to budget, perfect every time. But you don't learn anything doing like going down that path.
You don't.
You need to make mistakes. You need to like muck things up, but then you've got to take it on the chin when things go wrong. Like, at the end of the day, like, your job as the PM also is to take the heat for the team. I think there was a question in the chat there about how do you handle like anger from the sponsors and stuff, or from stakeholders. It's like, your job is to be the buffer between your team and the sponsors and executives within reason. Like, you need to make sure that, like, if there's a muck up, you're the one who's on the line for it, and it's okay if you make mistakes, as long as you like learn from it and rectify the best you can and continue on. Then there'll always be another project.
Oh,
There'll be
yeah,
another day
exactly.
to fight.
And I've seen too on some of the, like when we get into the ERPs, I mean, some of those projects you're a year minimum at times, and it's longer than that depending on the size of it. And I've had ones where I've come in later on in the project that they've already decided which route they're going. They've done some research on their own, and then getting thrown in and realizing, hey, these departments haven't ever had a conversation over here to know how to get in alignment. And then I'll start a meeting and everybody's fighting on the phone. The project man or the stakeholder gets wind of it and is like, oh my gosh, what are you doing? Like, my team is fighting, and you're losing trust. I'm like, no, this is just the conversation they needed to have, and nobody was willing to have it with them. And they'll be fine tomorrow. They just need to sit in it and figure out what they want. And it's part of my, I don't know, this is probably where you bring the change management aspect of all of this into it as well. Is being a project manager, you wear many hats during a project, and that is part of it. Is, to your point earlier, and we've talked before, of just that and emotional intelligence of what's going on and sensing things that a lot of times people don't want to say, and you need to encourage them to say it, even if it's gonna stir the pot a bit, or being the one that has to throw some gasoline on the fire to get it going, to get folks to say things, and then from there come up with, all right, now we're all aligned, and let's start moving forward again.
And that's what leads to these conversations. It's like what I let off with, like we should be able to assume it's just say, hey, we're going to do this. This is what's involved in getting it done. You do this task, you do that task, and get it done. But you add in human complexities and emotions and agendas and dynamics, and then it just goes all over the place. So that's why we're here to help deliver these sort of things, because you have to read through all that noise to get on paper. It seems simple. It's just like do a task, do another task, and eventually once you do them all, you've done what you need to do, and something's changed in the organization. But yeah, it really is so much more complex than that, unfortunately. I mean, for businesses, I guess. I enjoy the complexities, but
in a lot of ways, because it's, hey, how are you going to strategically help them? If it's this problem or it's this problem, and we got emotions over here, no emotions over here, and people that a lot of times, and not a punch at engineers, but a lot of times engineers, they are that, just straight face, but they feel all these things inside that they're upset about how things are going, but a lot of times won't say anything because they're quiet, or they haven't researched enough around something to come up with a counter against what's going on. And so I've seen that pop up a lot, especially in the manufacturing side of things.
Well, I mean, again, like touching on this around the PM side of things, like you're never the expert in the room either. Like you're sort of seen as like this leader, this manager with no, power, but you also are jumping into spaces a lot of the time where like I don't have the experience or the deep knowledge to make sure like what I'm hearing and what's being talked about is accurate or is going to lead to a successful outcome. So, that's what I started to use in my adaptiveness is like, okay, how do I get better at delivering things that I don't know a lot about? I mean, ERPs, like I've done a bit of work with it in that, but that's not my original background. Like manufacturing, I know very, very well, but identifying those key stakeholders, building that trust, like seeing who you can work with and understand, like, and build that rapport with is something that has led to more successful outcomes for me without being that subject matter expert, because it's very difficult managing people who know stuff but have agendas and have different dynamics at play. So sorry, I just saw Kyla's question. Kyla, yeah, I'm in tropical North Queensland, so there's a lot of birds and everything around me. So yeah, I'm in the jungle. Yeah, no, technically I am. I guess. I mean, Google the Whitsundays. I'm in the Whitsundays, which is a very beautiful part of Australia. So if you have Google.
And you're right by the beach, so you get it all.
Yeah, the beach is across the road. So.
Your stone wall in the background is just on the other side.
Well, I didn't want to show the mess behind me. So.
It's great. Are there anything that you can think of if somebody is looking to implement a new project or something like that, some key things when they're trying to find the right project manager to manage their project that they should be looking for?
Yeah, I think I've kind of touched on it in different ways through this session, but I think people who've actually had failure in their project management career and how they handle it, I think that's sort of a big thing you need to sort of look at. I think a lot of people, when they put their resumes together as a project manager or BA, etc., they try to highlight how perfect everything went with their whole career. Where, you know, I know you need to highlight the wins, but I think you need to also try and show, you know, some of the things that didn't quite go right and how you address those things, and what the outcomes were and what you learned from it, because that's the only way I think you become a more well-rounded project manager, or, you know, anyone who's doing this implementation type work. Like, you know, as much as we joke about, you know, challenging clients we've had and projects we've worked on, I think it makes us better overall in learning on how to deal with those people and deal with those situations. You know, like, yeah, it's frustrating at the time and you hate it and you're working long hours and you're stressed out, but like, you know, we said before the call, you know, there'll always be another project. You know, projects come to an end, and there's always something else that comes up. And I think that's part of the nature of this role that I love so much, is like it has a tangible beginning and end a lot of the time, and it gives you something new to learn regularly. So, but sorry, I digress. Beyond that, I would say you also want to chat to the person. Like, I think people on paper look really good, and like for me, I was never an A student. I was more like a B or a C student, and like getting my first few jobs, you know, I always was worried like I wasn't like perfect academically on the paper and everything, but having that ability to deal with people and talk to people and have that emotional intelligence, I think, is actually the most underrated skill when it comes to being a PM. I think anyone can read a book, anyone can follow a process and, you know, run a stand up, or, you know, do task checking or make a plan. But being able to deal with all the stuff we've been talking about today, I think that is what sets a good PM apart from like a, you know, average PM. You know, someone who's going to struggle with the chaos, who's going to struggle with conflict, who's going to struggle to, you know, push things through.
Kyler's like, tell her she'll drop a pin. She'll be in your backyard.
Drop you a pin. Yeah, I don't know where you are, Kyler.
You're in
Colorado. Somewhere. It's probably going to be like a 30-hour flight. Yeah, there you go.
A bit of a plane ride.
Yeah, it's a little while away. Colorado's beautiful. But yeah, so those are the main things I think you like really need to think of. Like the interesting thing from my career and when I meet with clients and things is like getting in the room for me is always the hardest part. Which, you know, when I moved back to Australia from Canada, starting your career again in a country you hadn't been living in for 10 years nearly. Yeah, 10 years, because I was in the UK for a bit, then Canada. But starting it again was really challenging. I ended up reaching out to 500 odd people before I started getting client meetings. And then once I did, I started getting offers straight away. Because once I could talk to people and actually get in that room and have a discussion and explain, you know, who I am and my background. And I think that's the most underrated thing. And I think everyone's struggling with that right now. Everyone talks about, especially in the PM field, but, you know, like, oh, getting the right AI resume and, you know, like you're automating your whole job search and blah, blah, blah. I'm like, yeah, I get that, but I think using platforms like LinkedIn is super underrated, but everyone tries to do it the automated way rather than just like send someone an email and say, hey, like, this is my background. I'd love to talk to you a bit, you know, like build those relationships. And as much as it's cliche to say, it is about who you know more than what you know. You know, once you get your voice in front of someone, you're not just a name on the page. You're a real person, and they'll likely look at you a little bit better, and it'll build from there.
That's awesome. Well, cool. Well, thank you so much for your time today and all things project management. I really appreciate it.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Christy. It was awesome.
Thank you, and thank everybody for their great questions too. That was awesome. And if there's any others that come through, we can respond to them afterwards. Yeah, feel free to hit me up on LinkedIn or in the chat here.